Hello, howdy. How you doing?
Doing
Doing
good, doing
well.
good. Yeah, sorry to cut you off, Zach. Doing great, man. Really excited to have this chat. Definitely, this is a conversation that I think needs to be had about the Green Party, about third party movements in general, and specifically about the candidate in question, Dr. Cornel West, who I know we have some disagreements on, Vosh. So, welcome back to the Vanguard. Thank you so much for taking the time to come hash this out with us. What have you been up to, man?
Um, Having a bad sleep schedule mostly. I got a new kitten recently. What else? I'm trying to make a video game. That's been pretty fun. Just a wide range of, this is my word of the day, bohemian interests. Being Joe Biden's strongest soldier, obviously, that's a day job. No, fun stuff like that. And I am happy to talk with you both. Whatever our disagreements, I find something interesting about the both of you, which distinguishes you from who I would consider to be your contemporaries, is that you're both actually human beings, which is not how I feel about a lot of other people I have this disagreement on.
Yeah, well, we try and be, look, I mean, I mean, everybody considers themselves to be a reasonable person. I guess it's not much of an entry point to be like, well, I consider myself to be a pretty reasonable human, a pretty personable guy. But I mean, I guess I could just see multiple angles on the third party strategy thing. And that's why I wanted to, kind of broach this with you, Vosh. Back in 2020, I think I was sympathetic to a lot of the arguments that you're about to present to our audience, given the, tremendous threat of, Donald Trump returning to office, obviously in the wake of COVID-19, that was all, on the forefront of everybody's minds. He had basically not handled one of the most, destructive viruses of all, our entire lifetime, going back over 100 years. He was, careless in every international conflict that we got into. We could go into the litany of problems of Donald Trump. And as a result of that, I was like, look, guys, like, I don't have any very kind words to say about Joe Biden, but I'm going to go ahead and pull the lever for the guy, given the fact that I think that he might do a couple of key issues that there's do things I agree with on, certain key issues, that Donald Trump was just absolutely unwilling to kind of consider, to like unwilling to go down the road of. Like, obviously, one of the chief things that I was interested in with Joe Biden, grasping at threads. He's not a perfect candidate, obviously, but I thought that he would do a better job at things like getting back into the Iran deal. Donald Trump practically nuked our relationship with Iran. Obviously, there was the extrajudicial assassination of Qasem Soleimani. There was the appointment of John Bolton, who has wanted nothing throughout his entire career than conflict with Iran, etc. So I thought that Joe Biden would be able to come in and shore that up, potentially rejoin the Iran nuclear deal, which was a accomplishment of the Obama and Biden administration that I actually thought was good. He abandoned that. He abandoned the $15 minimum wage. Was unwilling to literally do the most pen stroke work of firing a Senate parliamentarian to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. He opened up offshore drilling in natural areas, more than even Donald Trump had. He didn't end Title 42 until, gosh, what, 6-7 weeks ago. It feels like that was longer than Donald Trump had the brutal immigration policy enforced, even though it was at the height of the pandemic at that time. These list of things lead me to feel like the minutia between Joe Biden and, again, we said it on a clip that I think you've reacted to. I'm not here to make the case that, Joe Biden is as bad or worse than Donald Trump. I do not believe that. I believe that he is clearly the lesser evil candidate. But I also don't believe that with the timeline that we have, continuously supporting the lesser evil candidate is going to yield the results that I think all three of us would like. I may be giving birth to grandchildren that get to see a post-climate society in the year 2080. You know what I mean? Maybe not having to pay $6,000 a month for rent if you live in an urban epicenter, right? Because at the rate that things are going, so much displacement is going to occur both internationally as a result of the aforementioned climate change, but also domestically as the cost of living goes up in a way that Joe Biden is absolutely unwilling to intervene on. So just to kind of start the discourse, that's kind of where I'm coming at all of this on, Vosh. Like, how would you try and present to me that I should still vote for Joe Biden anyway in the face of all of those lack of accomplishments, and not a candidate like Cornel West, who I think is much more on the same page as me politically?
Well, leaving aside any criticisms I have for Cornel West, of which there are at least a few, the broader argument to me is just that it's not really a choice we have in the matter. Ultimately, any positive outcomes we're going to get for this country and its political future will be dictated by the interests of the working class, and at the moment, we have to meet the working class where they are. The vast majority of people in this country consider political engagement in this country to be limited to a discussion between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, or the Democrats and the Republicans. I don't think that we can skip a step and jump right on over to Cornel West, especially when the system is electorally rigged against third parties. And our best bet is to continue to use the potential viability of the Democrats to hold back the tide of fascist power taking. And in so doing, hopefully we can, as an additional step, try to warm them up to better ideas. I think Bernie Sanders did a great job of this, simultaneously bolstering the Democratic Party while also introducing people to more radical ideas within it. But we don't really have the luxury of handing anything over to Trump or the GOP. They're openly anti-democracy. Trump just said he'd suspend the Constitution. Every candidate but Trump is worse than Trump. DeSantis is worse than Trump. Vivek is worse than Trump. He's the best case scenario in the GOP, and he's also not acceptable. It's not a luxury we have to say, well, you know, we can leave this up on a shot. We can leave it to a lark while we play around with our better options. I think we have to work on what reaches the most people most effectively, which is why I'd be more positively inclined to Cornel West if he'd ran as a Democrat. I know the Dems are not keen on a primary this time around, but I think he could have reached a lot more people than if he, you know, gone the road that he did.
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to say that I'm actually not opposed to the idea of Dr. Cornel West running as a Democrat. There have been a couple people that have posited the idea. I think there was a Jacobin article written saying that Cornel should run as a Democrat, take advantage of the primary. And some people were like dunking on that article and its author. I thought that that article was perfectly reasonable. I understand why Cornel West doesn't want to run in the Democratic Party primary, but ultimately it's not something that I think would necessarily make his campaign any less viable. For sure, if anything, it would only make it more viable and would only give him more attention in the media, more access to mainstream media spaces in which he can, you know, deliver his message and kind of have a megaphone to speak to the American people. But that being said, he decided to run as a Green Party candidate, not in the Democratic primary. So I think that's kind of where we have to analyze the situation from. And as far as the Democratic primary goes, there actually is a candidate that Zach and I are supporting in that primary as well. We're both huge fans of Marianne Williamson and what she's bringing to the conversation. I think in many ways her candidacy comes close to embodying the essence of the progressive movement that Bernie Sanders started and the progressive socialist message that he kind of became so successful because of, right? And honestly, one of the most depressing things for me to watch happen as a progressive political commentator has been the dissipation of energy around policies like Medicare for All in the wake of the Bernie Sanders campaign ending in 2020. Bernie Sanders proved to us that via electoralism, I think even in the form of a long shot campaign, you really can move the ball forward. You can normalize progressive policies like socialized healthcare and massively increase public support and enthusiasm for said proposals, just like Bernie Sanders did before he even really had a chance of winning, right? I think it's hard to get people really excited about progressive activism, specifically when it relates to kind of depressing subject matters like climate change, for example. But I think it's a lot easier to get people excited about and paying attention to a presidential campaign. I've always said that progressive presidential campaign is like a rising tide that lifts the boats of progressive activism, just like we saw with Bernie. All these activist movements like for healthcare, et cetera, they got a big, huge help, like a big lift thanks to the enthusiasm that Bernie generated for those causes and those movements. And that's why I think it's really important that the left continues to engage in electoralism in presidential elections, and that our ideas have a marked presence in the debate surrounding the presidential election, which again is when most people kind of start tuning in and actually start paying attention to politics. That's why Zach and I have been so enthusiastic and supportive of Marianne Williamson, who I do think comes close to embodying that essence that Bernie Sanders represented. Like I said, that progressive message. Her platform is very similar to his and in some ways even better, but despite the fact that Marianne, as well as RFK Jr., who I'm not a fan of, despite the fact that they're polling at 10% and 20% respectively, the DNC is completely refusing to sanction debates, in essence, refusing to sanction a primary at all. And meanwhile, they're talking about what a threat to democracy the Republicans represent. They're not even entertaining the idea of democracy when it comes to their own party electorate. I think that's pretty crazy. And I think that it leaves us no choice but to engage in the presidential electoral process via the only other means that's left to us, which is to enter the general election as a third-party candidate to try to get on the debate stage that way, because the issues that we're fighting for as progressives are simply too pressing for us to take 4 years off and stand idly by as they coronate Joe Biden again, who's a feeble personification of establishment politics, who, despite being slightly better than some of his more neoliberal counterparts in the Democratic Party, still completely fails to meet the moment on the front of climate change, income inequality, ballooning police budgets, the military budget, and more. Tens of thousands of Americans continue to die every year under Joe Biden's watch due to lack of health insurance. And despite the fact that Biden promised to deliver a public option for the people while he was campaigning, he hasn't mentioned it since getting elected. Without Cornel West as a left flank candidate representing a thorn in the side of Joe Biden, who will call him out and hold him accountable for his failures, Vosh? Who will make the moral case against the neoliberalism that he represents? Because if it's not Cornel West, the only other candidate is potentially going to be Joe Manchin, who's not Donald Trump. If he decides to get in the race as an independent candidate or a no labels candidate, then that will represent the Overton window shrinking even more, and less debate, less attention for actual leftist causes that all three of us care about. Who will keep the momentum for policies like a Green New Deal, reparations, Medicare for all, and others alive while Joe Biden and Donald Trump continue to shrink the Overton window? And that's just the question that I most wanted to ask you, Vosh.
Well, there's a lot to get at there, but unfortunately, the answer is, if it's not within the Democratic primary, the answer is you don't get to. That's it. Nothing we do can come at the potential risk of empowering the fascists. Anti-fascism is the #1 ideological priority of everyone who isn't a fascist. It's as simple as that. It's not fair. I'm publicly critical of the Democrats for being so opposed to internal democracy. I've mocked them for being worse about it than the Republicans, but that doesn't change the underlying math. If anything that is done to, as you say, hold the neoliberal accountable, and it won't meaningfully, of course. The Democrats don't care if they lose, and they certainly don't care if an edge case candidate like Cornel West, who almost certainly, based on historical records, won't get 5%, but even if he did, wouldn't make a dent in Joe Biden's viability as a candidate. Unless it's to lose against Trump, which is the thing that we cannot allow to happen. If it's not done in the Democrat primary, then that's just the end of it. We can't risk this. I don't think that progressives are going to sleep for 4 years if Joe Biden wins again. There's plenty that we can do within that space. There's plenty progressives have done. Midterms showed that progressives won big, more than we expected, certainly, both in the sense that Republicans lost and the better Democrats won. We've seen wins in places like Chicago on local levels. I think that there's room for a lot of work that can be done. We just have to do it in ways that don't potentially give ammunition or power to our adversaries. I don't think we get another election if the GOP wins again. We don't really have room to mess up on that front.
I guess my follow-up to that, Vosh, would be, what is your end? And maybe you don't have one, but I think that that's kind of the gap here, right? Is I think that, per my mind, let's just engage in a counterfactual. We, show up, everybody votes for Joe Biden, kind of per your argument that you laid out, Vosh, as a denouncement of fascism from the Republican Party in whatever form it takes, Vivek, DeSantis, Donald Trump, who cares, right? And then at that point, you have Joe Biden in his second term, continuing his policy directions as he was engaged with today. And then he passes away and we get Kamala Harris as the VP who takes over and is now the president. And then the next election cycle comes around and they say there's not going to be a primary. It will be Kamala Harris in a similar way as it is right now, where they just decide not to engage in debates. They say, we have our president. This is the first Black woman president. This is the person that we're going to go with. And
Can
then
I
again,
answer you preemptively? Because I know what
Sure.
you're getting at.
You're going to just say you'd vote for her, right?
It never ends. We suffer and then we die. If all you can do in an election is push the fascists back for 4 more years, and then you do so, that's a victory. If you have the opportunity in an election to do something more, or a primary candidate to put forward who might be able to do something more, then you do that. And I think we should do that. But ultimately, the fight doesn't end at the ballot box. There are plenty of extra legislative and extra electoral ways to get your political message across. But we have to understand what we are capable of doing within the purview of any given election. Right now, with Joe Biden at the helm, the only thing we can do in 2024 is give ourselves a little bit more time. And maybe that'll be the case in 2028 and 2032 and so on and so forth. Maybe that'll be the case for as long as I'm alive. But if the math pans out that way, that's all there is to do with it. Socialism has been a known concept for well over a century. There is no socialist country on earth today. We have to understand we're dealing with timetables that extend well beyond our lives. We can't get indignant and frustrated when we don't get what we want, because the truth is we'll never get what we want, and then we'll die. No socialist has ever gotten what they wanted. It's the ability to rationally assess the range of what is possible and to act within it. Something political radicals tend to be really bad at. Fascists are always getting themselves killed because they can't understand the nature of the threats they face. And socialists have a similar problem. An inability to understand the meaningful distinctions between fascism and liberalism being a key one. If we don't understand that, then we will also be killed. We need to understand that the venue for our engagement with the masses has to be done under a liberal democracy. You can't do it under fascism. We're not allowed to speak under fascism.
But apparently we're not able to do it under a liberal democracy, as you just laid out. You said that we're always
doing it.
You know,
right now.
But this hasn't been working, Vosh. We've been spiraling towards climate change. Even if you look at people who would agree with you, Vosh, and you know, allege that, you know, we need to vote for Joe Biden and stave off the threat of fascism at the expense of everything else, our climate change future, our the state of the planet, all of those kinds of things. Which, you know, I'm not a single issue voter. I don't mean to come off that way. Although I do think that the climate change conundrum, if you want to put it mildly, you know, is something that needs to be addressed. You know, immediately. And so to have this kind of line of thinking where it's like, no, all we can do is prioritize staving off the Republican Party, that just leads me to believe that we're all going to die from climate change. And I can't accept that outcome.
Well, we are, for one. But for two, the Republicans would be worse on the climate change issue, too. Trump doesn't believe climate change exists. At least he pretends not to believe it exists. Vivek has openly stated that climate change is happening and it's anthropogenic, but it's good. And Ron DeSantis has laughed as insurance agencies pull their plans and coverage from Florida due to increasing damage from extreme weather events. Oh, no. I'm not saying Biden's good on climate change. I'm just saying they're worse. Yet another reason to keep them at bay.
Vosh, Biden has done more drilling, though, than Donald Trump. Under Biden's administration, gas drilling approvals outpaced Donald Trump's. According to the Washington Post, Biden is approving more oil and gas drilling permits on public lands than Donald Trump.
Okay.
I don't think it's fair to say that if climate change is your number one issue, then that's a reason why you have to just keep voting for the Democrats. When I think this is one of the...
Are you earnestly suggesting that on all the issues altogether, if we were to surmise the positions and policies associated with climate, that Biden has been worse than Donald Trump? He was more of a coal guy. I think you're focusing on one specific element of his presidential term. I think if you look at the whole picture, though, it's pretty clear. The Republican Party is far, far worse on climate issues than the Democrats.
I think that is fair. I think that is fair to point out. However, I think the degree to which they are better is at times just appallingly unacceptable.
Right.
I mean, he's given a bunch of funding for green energy and subsidies to green energy. He believes climate change exists, which is a pretty important step in any kind of meaningful improvement, I'd say.
Yeah, but if you look at the actual trajectory of the rate that we've been destroying the planet, all of those steps are going to be inconsequential, right? So that's all kind of irrelevant. Like, he's taking menial steps. He's not actually willing to do the hard work that it would take in order to, you know,
yeah. So we have two
solutions.
options, and one of them's worse. So we should go for the not worse one.
Well, I want to push back on that whole logic, Vosh, because I don't think that we necessarily just have to accept the status quo when it comes to the duopoly and their control over our options. You talk a lot about fascism and enabling fascism, but I think we would both agree that one of the big red flags of a fascist political party is a party that tries at all costs to stop any sort of democracy from happening, to stop people from engaging or choosing candidates that align with their values. And I don't think that describes any political institution. Okay, well, I think that element of the Democratic Party is absolutely fascist, the way that they refuse to sanction democracy, not when Joe Biden has a candidate with 1% in the polling. I understand why Biden wouldn't want to debate a candidate who was maybe polling at 1%, similar to how Bill Weld challenged Donald Trump. He never got above like 2% in the polling. So Donald Trump never debated Bill Weld. I don't think that was like some sort of anti-democratic fascist thing. I understand why Trump, the incumbent of his party, didn't want to debate Bill Weld. But the fact of the matter is that Marianne Williamson is at 10%, RFK is at 20%. Biden is refusing to even basically acknowledge the fact that his challengers exist. They're not sanctioning a primary. They're in no way sanctioning democracy. And even if you want to say, okay, well, this is an incumbent presidency, usually the incumbent president doesn't have to go through a primary. Okay, this one's an exception. Well, let's go back to 2016. You want to talk about enabling fascism? The Democratic Party enabled the fascism of Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton did the Pied Piper strategy, elevated Donald Trump among the Republican candidates. Meanwhile, they over and cheated Bernie Sanders, who was the actual people's candidate that could have defeated Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders could have staved off Donald Trump, and the DNC enabled the fascism of the Republican Party.
We're laying on a lot here, and we're doing some misnomers. All right, I'm a Bernie supporter. I don't take that back. They enabled the fascism unintentionally, but the Democratic Party did not deliberately get Donald Trump to win by fronting Hillary Clinton. The Democrats are incompetent and in some points collaborationist, but not insofar as they're willing to cede elections to the right. And they don't have to be internally democratic. They're a political party, not a government agency. They don't have to run a primary. I would prefer they did.
Isn't that deeply problematic, Vaughn?
Oh, I agree, but it's not fascism. I don't want these terms conflated, because to be clear, if the Republican Party got what they wanted, they would kill you both.
Vaj, I'm not
no. I want to be really clear, because we're clear on the wait, please. I didn't finish. We're clear on the threat of climate change, right? I understand the stakes involved. I just want it to be known that when I say, well, the Republican Party is fascist or whatever, I'm not just talking about like a temporary secession of rights. What I'm saying is, by my estimation, I feel I've made arguments that are fair and reasonable in this account, they would shoot you. So we're dealing with a threat level that we don't get to play with. There's no gradient here. We don't get to put a toe in and decide, okay, well, we'll cede a bit of power, but if it means that Cornel West gets to throw a rock at Biden, God, I wish, on the debate stage, there are concessions that we can't make. And as long as we can agree that Biden is better than Trump, which I think is a easy argument to make, the question then is, okay, insofar as we accept Biden must win, what can we do for the progressive agenda? And I think that's a valid question. And there's plenty we can do there, even stuff that upsets the Democratic Party. I mean, there's lots of work to be done there.
I agree, Vosh, but I think you're like slightly missing my point. I just want to make it clear what I'm saying here. I think that, and I agree about the threat, the fascism that the Republicans represent. I also, and this might be a slightly an area of disagreement that we don't have to go down an entire road. I also think the Democrats represent a more milquetoast variety of fascism. That is fascism nonetheless, but I will grant you that the Republican Party represents a more real, more scary form of fascism. And my problem with the duopoly is that every single election cycle, as you said, it leads to there being a 50% chance of a fascist being elected. You said that earlier in the conversation. We just have to deal with the system and keep trying to stave off the fascists every time. Well, in 2016, more people voted for Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump, and the fascist still became president. In 2020, more people voted for Joe Biden than Donald Trump, and Biden did become president, but now the fascist is back. Biden didn't, charge him with sedition or take care of the problem or anything. He's back. Now we have to come out and do it all over again.
Yeah, until we die. Yes.
And I reject that, and I think that
you
that
can't
dynamic,
reject it.
that
It's
duopoly
reality.
is worth protesting. I think it is worth protesting, just like many other elements of our society, which seem to be just set in stone and unchangeable. I think it's worth protesting. Every other developed country,
unchangeable. I don't think it's unchangeable. It cannot be. We cannot make attempts to change it in ways which allow for the fascists to win. I want it to change, but we can't attempt to change it in ways that cede ground to the fascists. That's my only condition.
Well, don't you think that it's ceding ground to the fascists more not to vote at all than it is to vote green? There's 40% of the country that doesn't vote at all. There's like 1% of the electorate that actually does decide to participate in democracy, that shows up to the polls and they cast their vote not for a fascist, but for someone to the left of even the Democrat. How is that person enabling fascism when 40% of the country doesn't even get out of the bed to go vote at all? How is that? How are these people enabling fascism?
A person who doesn't vote is unknowingly enabling fascism. A person who votes green is knowingly enabling fascism. You're right, though. But mathematically, they're the same thing. And I've got plenty of issues with people who don't vote, too.
I think that if I could maybe like expand this a little bit, Vosh, because I am curious. I think that if we went down a litany of issues, political positions, right, Medicare for, let's just call it the Bernie Sanders slate, of modern policy prescriptions to make America a better place, right? I think down the line, you and I would probably agree with a lot of those issues. Am I correct in that?
I'm sure prescriptively we agree on almost every political issue. Yeah.
Okay. So my question for you is, if you're unwilling to engage in a electoral pursuit, you say, I'm not saying we can never have any of these things. I'm just saying that I'm not willing to risk it, i.e. in opposition to Donald Trump, right? Or, whatever the Republican Party is offering, which will undoubtedly be a fascist. How do we get there, right? Because I personally believe that a lot, right? I believe that, hey, we have to, like, I actually voted for Hillary Clinton, right? Like I was not around with Donald Trump. You know what I mean? Like I've never been one of those people that was like, and neither has Gavin, one of those people that was like, oh, January 6th wasn't that bad, or like this guy is not actually like a problem. Like I think that, that's absolutely absurd and just like, wrong by every metric, right? Like Donald Trump was horrible as a president, but after seeing the amount of discourse around pushing Biden to the left, after seeing the amount of, oh, these are the things that we have to do in order to accomplish things outside of the electoral process. This is what we have to do. And that was what was lectured to everybody in 2020, right? We actually had Noam Chomsky on our show, and he lectured us about it. You know what I mean?
Oh, don't worry. I'd call him a fascist too.
Well, there you go. You know what? He's certainly terse. I'll put it that way. But, what I'm saying is that I am sympathetic to a lot of what you're sympathetic to, but how do we get there? Because I'm not willing to accept the outcome of we're just going to all die from climate change. Nobody's ever going to have health care. Rent is going to be continuously more and more unaffordable, as will things like food that's nutritious and, grown organically. Which our chat always calls me a yuppie for, but I do think everyone is entitled to. Things like that. How do we accomplish that in your estimation, still voting for Joe Biden?
Well, I think that, we need people on our side, obviously. Right now, it's about meeting people where they are. The average American right now, what do they care about? You say healthcare, they don't care. They don't care about healthcare. Inflation, they don't care about inflation. They say they do. People talk about it when they're polled. But what actually motivates people to get up, to go outside, to get angry online? Overwhelmingly, it's not meaningful stuff that actually affects the quality of their lives. It's culture war stuff. I mean, it's unfortunate. I'm not saying inflation and healthcare aren't important. They're critically important. But we can see this with climate change, right? Climate change, the greatest existential threat man has ever seen. And right now in England, if you go to, you're one of those just stop oil protesters, you go in front of a car for 2 seconds, every British person, they'll jump out of their car, they'll beat you to death right there. The cops will put their thumbs up. They want you dead, People are bad at estimating the positions that actually matter to them. And I think what most people, I shouldn't say most, but many liberals in America are most concerned with right now is the encroach of fascism. It's something I'm obviously pretty concerned with as well. I think the best way to affect change is to work on wedge issues and pivot points, assuage people when possible, and get them increasingly concerned with the issues we care about when given the opportunity. So this is why Biden got so many more votes than Hillary Clinton, in addition to the fact that Biden is much more likable than Hillary. It's because after one term of Donald Trump's presidency, people realize, oh, this isn't like Bush anymore. We can't just sit grumpy on the sidelines. There's like a threat, Towards the end of Trump's presidency, Attorney General Barr was threatening sedition charges to Black Lives Matter protesters. Could have rounded up millions of Americans, though realistically he probably would have captured far fewer than that. It still would have been a threat to essentially everyone. This is a real problem. And now people are all worked up over it. And a lot of people will take anyone, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, anyone, over the alternative. So I say, work with it. Be God's strongest soldier for Joe Biden. Assuage those fears. Work
but that doesn't.
line.
Hold on. I don't want to cut you off.
But we're doing it for a good reason, because we're biding our time, and we're introducing our perspective on wedge issues when given the chance. See, that's why I think the progressives did so well back in 2020. This is the era of populism, right? It's not just
hold on though,
Vosh.
Hold on. You said introducing the ideas over time, but I mean, I'm not that old. I remember going from 2015, Barack Obama's president. I'm a junior in high school. Then AP Gov starts August, 2015. And all anybody's talking about is Bernie Sanders. And now the entire political discourse has changed to include like whether or not it's crazy to give everybody free healthcare, whether or not it's crazy to give everybody college tuition for free, at a public level. Everybody's talking about how is this crazy or not? And then the entire public settled on the fact that no, it wasn't crazy. And you can still look, as I'm sure you have done, Fox News polling, which will show that if you ask people if, healthcare is a human right, if everybody should be afforded, healthcare, or even if you ask them specifically about Medicare for all, it'll be above water. 51%, right?
Yeah,
that happened. Immaculate. That was a seismic shift in, people's understanding, people's, the Overton window is like the popular way of phrasing it, I think, right? Is that it was shifted massively to the left, right? And so now people started to believe, oh, hey, maybe we can have these things that everyone else in the developed world has, that we ensured they had if it was a country that we destroyed after World War II. We made sure they had a nationalized health service, right? And you can document all over the world, France, Italy, South Korea, Japan, they all have a far superior healthcare system than us.
Happen? When was this big shift in people's perspectives on what can and can't be done by the government?
I believe it. I mean, don't you believe when were people talking about any of those things? When was there rhetoric and groundswell? I mean, if you look at the membership of the DSA, it went through the roof when that happened. I mean, and now you have things popping up across the country like tenants unions. You have, organizers, moving around. It was a seismic shift in the public consciousness. I feel like,
I feel like is that back in 2016, right?
Right. And so what do we do to take that shift, right? Which I feel like happened overnight. You keep calling them like fringe wedge issues, but actually they have a lot of popular support, broad public support, even amongst people who would not be Democratic primary voters. So it's not a wedge issue. It's not a fringe issue. It's actually the popular issue. As you mentioned, we're in an era of populism, but yet we've denied, because of our corporate duopoly, anybody the opportunity to actually support a candidate that's going to institute those policies, which just, of course, encourages disenfranchisement.
That's exactly the thing, though. Bernie Sanders only did well back in 2016 because it was preceded with 8 years of Obama. Obama crushed McCain and did really well against Mitt Romney as well. Obama's era was one of complacency, but complacency has a positive side, which is when people get comfortable. When people get, did I say Mitt Romney? Mitt Romney, whatever. All white people the same. When people get complacent, when people get familiar with Obama type status quo smug liberal politics, right? People want more. The problem we're dealing with right now is that the Republican Party is such an existential threat that it's introduced an environment where any Democrat is so much better than the Republicans that we've kind of cut down on the internal differences. The difference between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden is nothing compared to the difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. They're massive. The gulf is huge. And so the apparent difference between candidates on the left shrinks. What we need to do is crush the Republicans. We need to assist in the Democrats' victory over them. The Republicans must have no chance of winning. They have to be irrelevant. They need to be made non-existent as a party. And in that environment, which is the environment we were in back in 2008, 2012, where Obama was crushing it, was doing well on basically every level up until the very end, in that environment, people become discontented because now that they're no longer placated with the threat of Republican intervention, they can be sold a better narrative. And that's why Bernie Sanders hit the way he did. If Bernie Sanders had showed up in 2020 for the first time, I think it would have been like Marianne right now. I think he would have just shown up, little voice, gone down, not really mattered. I think he just would have been another person up on that stage.
Wait, Vosh, just to understand, I feel like you kind of contradicted yourself because earlier you said we're always going to have to deal with the Republicans in every election cycle, and it's always going to be something that until we die, we're going to have to resist and fight back against. But now you just said we have to basically defeat them once and for all or something?
We need to, I don't think fascism is literally an eternal threat, but I think that we need to always ward off against the right wing, however it may represent itself. And I think that insofar as fascism exists in this country through the GOP, it can be pushed down. not done away with entirely, of course, but if it seems like less of a threat, then yeah, I think there's more room for discourse in the left, right? Because then the
Right.
average voter, the average liberal, doesn't see every election as an existential war for the safety of this country and its democracy, but rather as, there's a little bit more wiggle room. The main reason people voted for Biden in 2020 was because he was the most electable candidate, not because they liked him or his policies or any other reason actually associated with him, but because he was the most electable, which indicates to me that they were concerned first and foremost with beating a Republican, not with finding a Democrat candidate they liked. I think we need to focus on the first priority, beating fascists first, and then we get the luxury of bantying about our ideas in an environment where they're taken over any victory against fascists.
I understand what you're saying, but I think the problem I have with that is I feel like that's what we've been doing for all of modern American history, right? And as long as we have a duopoly, that means that the pendulum's going to keep swinging back and forth. Even if we defeat fascism for now, in 4 years, we're going to be in a whole different political climate. And the nature of a duopoly election is that the pendulum swings back. Even after 8 years of Democratic dominance under Obama, like you mentioned, pendulum still swung back to Donald Trump. Sometimes people just get bored of who's in power and think maybe this other team will help me out more. We saw the same thing happen in Brazil when Lula, who was president for like 14 years or something and did such a great job as president, but people that had grown up under Lula and didn't really know anything else, they were like, hell, we'll vote for this other guy, Bolsonaro, just because he's different. We don't know what it's like to not live under Lula, so let's try out Bolsonaro.
Have changed. I mean, we got the Civil Rights Act. The country's clearly shifted leftward over time, even if things swing between the two parties, an inevitable consequence of a first past the post voting system.
That's what I'm saying is worth protesting, Vosh. This idea that we have to have only two choices, which aren't even real choices, by the way, because as I said, the DNC massively put their fingers on the scale and basically cheated Bernie Sanders out of the 2016 election when he actually could have beat Donald Trump. I don't think Donald Trump would have really been successful against any other candidate, other than Hillary, who was so uniquely easy for him to defeat. And who gave us Hillary? The DNC gave us Hillary, and Trump, for that matter. Like I said, they did the Pied Piper strategy with whether or not it was intentionally a way to make Trump president. Obviously not, but it still kind of enabled him to a very large degree. And I
do away with first past the post voting. I agree. We're not going to do that under fascism, though.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that then, Vosh, because I'm sympathetic to the argument. We had this conversation with Kyle Kalinske. I think you reacted to it, and I think that he made a version of this argument that I'm definitely I understand, right? And I appreciate the fact that Kyle, he says, I would love to vote for Cornel West. I would love to vote for the Green Party as I have in the past. I just don't think it's realistic because of the fact that we have first past the post voting. We don't have ranked choice voting yet. So until we have something like ranked choice voting, I don't really think it's like viable to support third party candidates. I understand that logic and I get that argument. But that being said, I think that the third party movement is all about resisting the duopoly aggressively, not asking for their permission to vote for a candidate who's not just one of two evils, right? So just waiting around until we have ranked choice voting, I don't think that's a good idea either, because we can't just wait for permission, right? We can't just wait until
we can, and we have to. It's not mathematically possible for a third party to outperform one of the two major parties in a first.
It has happened though in elections.
You have to go back like a long time.
I mean, in the late '90s, Jesse Ventura won the governorship of Minnesota,
or local elections, to be sure. But states don't always have the same systems for allocating votes. We obviously have the Electoral College for the federal government. The amount of money that's spent between the two parties on advertising themselves and legitimizing themselves, it's not something that a third party can compete with. And even if they did so far as to oust their ideologically, adjacent party, all they would do is throw the election to the other side. We do need something other than first past the post voting, or there's no viability for third party candidates. It's just mathematically not possible. We know how these models trend. It's just not viable. It's essentially a waste of a vote.
Well, Vosh, if that's the case, and I kind of agree to some extent, and people actually become worried enough about the spoiler effect that they institute ranked choice voting, which, if anyone's not familiar, takes care of the spoiler effect. Under ranked choice voting, you could vote number 1, Cornel West, number 2, Joe Biden, and then if Cornel West doesn't get enough votes, then your vote carries over and it goes to Joe Biden. Right? That's the system we'd all like to live in, because then you can vote your conscience without having to worry about the spoiler effect. But I think that there's not going to be much of a public appetite for ranked choice voting. No one's even really going to care about it unless there is a bold and viable third party movement in the first place, right? It's kind of like the chicken and the egg. No one's going to care about ranked choice voting until they actually have third party candidates that they're excited about and want to see elected. And if we can get Cornel West to 5%, mostly through a strategy of people who live in safe states like Alabama, which is definitely going to go red, or California, which is definitely going to go blue. If we can get to a strategy where those people, at least enough of them, vote for Dr. West and get him to 5%, well, that will be a real game changer, in my opinion. It would qualify the Green Party for recognition as an official national party and for federal funding in the next presidential race. That would increase the public awareness of the Green Party and of the concept of non-duopoly options, in my opinion, to such an extent that it would increase the movement for ranked choice voting. It would make more people interested in making ranked choice voting a reality, because without that, people are just going to forever believe that third-party candidates are a waste of their vote, that it's just a protest vote, that it's unserious, unviable. Right, and that's why we need ranked choice voting. And until people actually have an appetite that and want third-party candidates as options and to be able to succeed, no one's going to be doing activism on behalf of ranked choice voting.
If we're going to chicken and the egg this argument, I think we should start at the point that doesn't cede votes over to the fascists. Beginning with ranked choice voting and then building up legitimate third-party movements is the best shot that we have for making that work. But tossing 5% of the vote to Cornel West, making it harder for Joe Biden to win against Donald Trump. And for what?
How does people showing up to vote in Alabama for Green Party candidate hurt the chances of Joe Biden? Do you think Joe Biden has a feasible chance of winning a state like Alabama with all of its gerrymandering and crazy people?
Well, first of all, voting doesn't actually work that way. When public figures such as yourself and I say, hey, vote for this third-party candidate, but only in this slim case in these states, what you're actually saying is vote for the candidate. I've just seen this before in 2016 and 2020, and I don't, there's never, no matter how disciplined you are when you say it, people vote for who they think they should vote for, and they're not going to let pragmatism come in the way of that. It's just a consistent problem. Also, I want Alabama to go blue, Cali's not solid blue, right? Like, there's a lot of red in Cali, and, Georgia went blue. People didn't expect that. Maybe some people would have written Georgia off as red. I certainly think I might have, Florida used to be a swing state. Now it's red. Maybe it could go blue again. The problem is, if you give up as soon as a state turns red, then you preclude the possibility of moving it back into being a swing state. And if you give up when the state's already blue, then you give the Republicans the opportunity to pull it into a swing state.
I don't think it's giving up, though, to say, hey, because of the fact that my vote is essentially meaningless if I live in New York or Alabama.
That's the giving up. You just said the giving up.
Giving up perhaps on the Democrats, but not in general. I think it's saying, okay, because of the fact that in my assessment, it's a waste of my vote, no matter who I vote for in Alabama, might as well take that opportunity to try to build something new on this ripe, fertile ground, right? I don't think that's really giving up. And also another related,
you're ceding ground to the Reds.
I mean, I think that in a state like Alabama, as Zach said, there's not really a feasible chance that Joe Biden has of winning the state, which is another reason to raise awareness about how pointless the Electoral College is. I think it's ridiculous.
Texas.
Well, Texas, I think, is close enough to being a swing state at this point that you could make the calculus that you want. I'm not in the business personally of telling people necessarily who to vote for. Or
do it. Wait, why not? It's a moral judgment. We should make prescriptive statements.
Because Vosh, I think it depends on which state you live in. I think that for everyone in my audience, they probably have slightly different experiences and slightly different priorities that might lead them to wanting to vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump, but also people that would want to vote for Cornel West and have no interest in voting for Joe Biden. Maybe them or people they know have been affected by the crime bill that Joe Biden wrote. Maybe people they know have been affected.
No. Fuck their experiences. My audience's experiences. Fuck all of them. If there's a moral argument to be made, then their opinions don't matter. You say what you think is right. in Texas? Or is it Joe Biden or Cornel West? I don't get into this. So my interest in electoralism isn't well, get out there and vitalize the system. As far as I'm concerned, there are right and wrong answers, and I want people to make the right ones. And I'll be as forceful about that with my audience or others as I feel is necessary. A lot's on the line here. I just worry that while we're all starry-eyed looking up at the sky, hoping that maybe with this esoteric strategy we can get Cornel West to somehow get more votes than the prior third-party candidates have, and that would get him the $15 million or so in federal funding that he could then use to get, let's be real, not that much more of a percent of the vote. Debate against Joe Biden, which would be a senile old man throwing rocks fest, accomplish nothing. Joe Biden maybe wins, maybe loses, but it's harder for him now against Donald Trump, and all of this is the risk. I mean, we're flirting with the worst possible outcome. That's what I'm worried about. It would be a lot easier to make these decisions and take these risks in an environment where loss does not come at mortal expense. We have to be careful.
But then it's a zero-sum game, Vosh, which is what I've been trying to, and I don't want to steer the conversation
backwards. Votes are votes.
What I wanted to, kind of get your perspective on here is that you made the point that, you would prioritize ranked choice voting as a potential solution, and calling your Congress people, whatever, getting them, people motivated on board with passing ranked choice voting before you would ever consider, supporting a third party operation, which is fine. I just think that makes it impossible, because not only are you going to come up against absolute crazy opposition from basically every corporate source ever, the Republicans, but also you're going to have to start battling the Democrats, right? And if you always fold and you always come back and give the Democrats what they want, that they will never institute ranked choice voting, because they know it will be their death certificate, right? The Democrats want a rigged game between, they want to be the only game in town, right? They want to, it's like Vegas. It's all divvied up between the same couple of casino owners, right? Even though they open up a bunch of different casinos on the strip, hotels on the strip, it's all the same five guys that run the show, right? And that's exactly how they like it. And if anybody else comes onto the block, they will collectively, like piranhas, run that guy out of town. That's how the Democrats like it, because as you mentioned, I believe on this exact stream.
Has the game changed at all in the past
century? Well, I know you brought up the civil rights movement, and obviously that's a tremendous accomplishment that was brought after decades of horrendous struggle by some of the greatest Americans that we've ever seen. And no, I would never try and downplay that, but I would also introduce to you the fact that a lot of up shit happened after the civil rights movement, right? We've been on a downward slide where not a lot of great things have happened. One, we lost Roe versus Wade comes to mind pretty quickly. It doesn't look like Obergefell is going to be protected in the future. If the Supreme Court keeps going the way that it's going, they'll tear every protection
but
apart.
That's because the Republicans won.
Loving,
they got to win. They got one, but that's it. That's what I'm saying, right? They got one term. Trump appointed 3 judges, and that's all it took for them to tear apart a whole bunch of civil rights oriented.
But in addition, I just took that in one direction. We could talk about the other things that have happened far before Donald Trump did that. We could talk about NAFTA and how, as a result of Bill Clinton and the Democrats in the 80s trying to appease whatever craziness of the right wingers at the time, the new Democrat, it's the economy, stupid kind of bullshit that was going on at the time. It led us to offshoring all kinds of jobs, right? What was Obama up to? He was offshoring all kinds of jobs, and he was also bailing out the bankers. Do you know what I'm saying?
I'm not saying everything's perfect, but things have gotten on the whole better over the past 100 years, in spite of the fact that we've been juggled in a corporate duopoly. I don't think that the existence of a corporate duopoly means that we're incapable of making positive changes. I think lots of positive change can be made from within it. And I also think that, let's be realistic here, your shot at changing all this has a 0% chance at working. The overwhelming might of global capitalism stopped by people in Alabama voting for Cornel West rather than... No. See, that's the thing here. What you're talking about fundamentally is a corporate superstructure that can only be overthrown through great violence, or at the very least civic uphaul. We're not talking about something that Cornel West can do. Bernie Sanders couldn't do it. None of us can, not individually and not as a group. We're talking about revolutionary stuff. So as long as we're talking about a problem that can't be solved with non-revolutionary engagement, as long as we're talking on the electoral level, I think we should solve with electoralism what electoralism can solve, and that is holding back fascism for a bit. If you want to challenge the corporate duopoly, I don't endorse you doing so in this fashion on this level, not only because it cedes ground to fascists, I think, but also because it's not the level at which you'd have to engage. Let's be real. The corporate duopoly is not going to be overthrown by third parties without significant changes to our civil structure. You're talking about larger things, which I hope could also be engaged in without ceding ground to fascists. But this environment, I just feel like people make electoralism out to be more than it is. As far as I'm concerned, I wake up 1 year out of every 2 and I go to the poll and I do my best to sort of ward off the legal encroach of fascism. But that's it. You know, that's a small step in a broader plan.
Right. And I think that that's where the disagreement between us kind of really is found, Vosh, because what we're saying is that we have to seize upon the opportunity that is afforded to us by electoralism, specifically the once every 4 years horse race and media spectacle that is the presidential election. I'm saying we have to seize on that, and we have to think like activists, not just people that are going into a voting booth to practically make a decision. The media, like I said, affords us once every 4 years this gigantic horse race spectacle that everyone decides to pay attention to. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this debate, Bernie Sanders proved to us that even via a long shot campaign that at first wasn't at all taken seriously, you can use that circus to seriously elevate real positions and progressive priorities that previously were unthinkable and not even part of the political discourse in this country. You can elevate these positions and actually start a literal mass political movement. In the case of Bernie Sanders, the likes of which has not existed in my entire lifetime. And that was accomplished via electoralism. Now, as I said,
he ran as a Dem.
Right. And as I said at the beginning of this debate, that's why Zach and I are supportive of Marianne Williamson. I think that she is continuing the project that Bernie Sanders started, and in some ways trying to go even further by talking about issues like reparations that Bernie Sanders didn't even touch. And I really appreciate the work that she's doing. But the fact of the matter is that the Democratic Party is refusing to acknowledge it. They're refusing to sanction a debate. They're refusing to let the American people hear her ideas. They're refusing to let her ideas be contrasted with the current administration's whatsoever. So while under a theoretical, situation, I would agree with you. Yes, the Democratic Party is the ideal vessel for this sort of cultural revolution or whatever you want to call it to take place. Unfortunately, the DNC is not letting that happen right now, which is why I think we have to go. I disagree.
No, it's not. It's not disagreeing. It's math. The third party ain't gonna win. It's one or the other in the duopoly.
But Vosh, I just said it's not about winning. I don't think that Cornel West is going to vote. I don't think that any third party
about winning. That's the only thing that matters.
Do you think that? Okay, before you cut me off and go on a spiel or something, I want to ask you a question. Do you think that protesting is something that is worth engaging in, even if it doesn't result in what you want to accomplish getting accomplished?
Yeah, but if it ends up ceding ground to the right, then no.
Okay, well, I think that the nature of the duopoly ends up ceding ground to the right 50% of the time, predictably, like clockwork.
No, you
and
can't.
Then it's worth protesting.
You can't say that you're going to withhold voting for Joe Biden to protest the duopoly because the existence of the duopoly cedes power to the right. That's not. You can't say that you're giving power to the right because you're protesting a system that is giving power to the right. You're the one doing that. I think the big issue with the duopoly, personally, is that it instills complacency, which keeps those loser 40% Americans who don't get out and vote from coming out and voting Democrat like they should.
Vosh, I actually think that the threat of the 5% spoiler, I actually think that makes Joe Biden a better candidate. Because what does it make him at least have to consider doing? Well, shit, I might lose these 5% of the Democratic electorate to this far left candidate, Cornel West. Maybe I'll actually have to, do some executive orders. Maybe I'll have to legalize cannabis, and then I'll win over some of those voters. It could actually make him a better president. It could force him. Yes, if he thinks, I'm going to lose 5% of my Democratic electorate to some fringe radical leftists, maybe the only way to win them back is to, legalize cannabis, free the nonviolent drug offenders, start talking about a public option more, actually start introducing legislation to make it possible.
If they win. And also, that only works if you don't actually vote green. Like, it would have to be a disingenuous threat. Like that, it's like the Bernie or bust strategy where people say, well, if Bernie doesn't win the primary, I'm not voting. But they're lying, and they're actually going to continue to vote for Biden in the general. I mean, if you're comfortable with doing that disingenuously, then I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, as long as everybody knows that it's a disingenuous threat and you're going to vote blue when the time comes. But the actual threat of, not voting for Biden gets more votes for Biden, that doesn't sell, right? We
Vosh,
need Biden to win. That's always first priority. And he's the only one who can beat Trump. I wish it weren't the case. I do. But that is the environment we're in right now.
If Joe Biden loses to Donald Trump, I promise you there will be more of a percentage of the trusty Democratic electorate that didn't show up to vote for him than the infinitesimal percentage of the electorate that did show up to vote for Cornel West. If he loses, it's his fault because he didn't do a good job as president, because he did nothing to materially change the lives of people in order to convince them to come out and reelect him in the first place. I simply do not buy into the argument that it's the fault of 0.7% of the Democratic electorate who decided, hey, maybe I'll vote for this guy who's actually talking about the things that need to be talked about and is actually promising to do the things that need to be done.
It'd be all your faults. But I agree. Yeah, no, by far the greatest threat is the group of people who don't vote at all, for sure. My concern is more the spread of that idea. And I talk to them too. There are lots of people who I see online who say, I'm not going to vote at all anymore. Nihilism, doomer. And I say lots of very mean words to them, of course. I'm not partial here. It's not a specific hatred of Cornel West. Right. Everyone must vote for Biden. We will all bend the knee. There's just no room to banter about. I don't want to be shot personally. I don't think either of you want to be shot. I assume you live in America. I don't actually know that for sure, but I believe you do.
We do.
We live in a red state, so it's extra scary here.
Yes,
everybody has a gun.
I don't doubt it. I think that there's a very good reason to be concerned. I don't normally do this, but I've seen a lot of people in your chat who, fine people, no contention there, but they don't think I'm using the word fascism properly. And I would beg them to engage with some media that draws a comparative analysis between the rhetoric and political interests of the modern day GOP and of the Nazi Party prior to their taking over Germany. It's a trite argument online. Oh, look, he's bringing up Hitler. Right, I know. But sometimes it's a valid one.
I don't think anyone here is arguing, though, that the Democrats aren't Nazi-esque or fat. We're in no way trying to downplay.
No, not you two. Just the chat. I worry. I worry.
Yeah, our chat is crazy sometimes. I think everybody's is. But the one question I did want to have while you brought that up, the threat of like, literal Nazism in America, and I couldn't let the opportunity while we're talking about potential alternatives to Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I think probably one of the most outspoken anti-Semitic candidates, unfortunately, is also running against Joe Biden. Have you been paying attention at all to Robert Kennedy Jr.?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a right-wing plant that's been put with the Dems to disrupt things, but I don't think he's done a good job of it. But yeah, he's I don't even know if he's a Nazi. He's definitely an anti-Semite. He might. He
posted the 1488 thing on Twitter the other day. Did you see that? I don't know if it was intentional, but it's kind of hard to not be suspicious.
I definitely think it was.
Nazi Jews were immune to COVID. I was like, bro, this seems like it's only one thing.
Yeah, he said it was like a bioweapon, and hey, isn't it weird that bioweapon doesn't target the Chinese or Jews? Yeah, I know.
Isn't that crazy?
I think didn't DeSantis say that he would consider him for a running mate or something?
Yes.
Yeah,
not a running mate, but I think he said that he was like hella celebrating him in regards to his like vaccine, knowledge or whatever.
Yeah, he's a plant. He's being funded. I'm not being conspiratorial. It's literally been shown. He's being funded through the same channels that a bunch of far right candidates are.
Like Marjorie Taylor Greene.
To disrupt things. I don't know how effective he'll be. This is the issue with like a lot of these, I'm here to criticize the left, but actually I'm a Nazi, like Greenwald or Russell Brand types. They can't keep it in their pants, Like on one year, it's, I have criticisms of the Democrat Party and I'm seriously concerned with, and then 2 years after that, it's them all like Sieg Heiling, they can't draw out the movement that far. Tim Pool did the same thing.
But not to be roundabout, but I was just asking, do you think that will end up ultimately having a impact on the outcome, right? We talk about like, Cornel West being the alternative spoiler candidate. I wonder if RFKJ will end up running as an independent and then kind of poaching votes. Honestly, primarily, I think if he ran as an independent, he would poach far more votes from the Republican candidate than Joe Biden. So I'm just wondering how somebody like that entering a potential general election third party run, would impact your analysis.
No, I agree. Well, hold on. I am completely pro voting for third party as long as the right's doing it. I think it's great when they do it. I fully support their ability to express their discontent with the corporate duopoly. If Trump or RFK or even the libertarians, which are just Nazi posting these days because the Mises caucus completely took over the party. If people want to go to any of those directions, that's fine by me. Purely because it makes the Reds weaker. I don't want
Actually,
to win.
I had a question about that, Vosh, because the other day on your stream when you were reacting to our video, you basically said that, oh, this is only something that people on the left do. The right wing always falls in line. They're the most obedient behind the Republican candidate, and even if they think he's a rhino, they'll fall in line because they understand it's what's best for the movement. But actually, that's just not true. The libertarians do better than the Greens almost every single election cycle. Joe Jorgensen got more votes than Howie Hawkins. Gary Johnson got more votes than Jill Stein. But weirdly, you never really see the Republicans crying about the spoiler effect. You never see them blaming libertarian candidates when the GOP candidate loses. So I was just wondering what you make of that and why you think the Democrats, because I think it's a real sign of weakness, right? For the Democrats, whenever they lose, to immediately blame a powerless faction of radicals that make up an infinitesimal fraction of the voting electorate, immediately to blame those people. And you never see the Republicans do that, which is odd to me. Do you know why that is?
No, well, I think they do bitch about the Libertarian Party quite a bit. I saw it in 2020 quite a lot because there were some elections they lost because of them, which I thought was really funny. Also, it's worth noting that the Libertarian Party has changed a lot. JoJo was a progressive libertarian. She got a lot of flack from her compatriots when she defended BLM back in the general. Now I think the Libertarian Party is much more concretely right wing, so it's possible there's going to be more of a shift. Though my guess would be that the Libertarian Party gets less support and more of them move over to the right. I think that the right, there aren't really arguments online with far right people with not voting for the Republicans, because the most extreme hardcore far right people, whether they be Fox News boomers or neo-Nazis or whatever else, they tend to be very militantly active when it comes to promoting the power of the Republican Party, because a lot of them are aware of the fact that even if Republican senators and legislators will say that, they condemn racism or anti-Semitism, a lot of them are just Nazis, right? So they know that and they work towards that. The DeSantis campaign is full of Nazis. They keep falling out of them like a dog scratching at a flea-infested spot of their fur. So I there might be a shift there. I'm not entirely sure. It's just the left radicals. There's always these arguments about electoralism, and it bothers me because I don't really care. For me, it's just about victory. I don't think much can be done within the duopoly. I don't have much faith in the Democratic Party or in Joe Biden. I think sometimes we get these culture shifts forward with people like Bernie, and I love that. I love that when that happens. But for the most part, I think that electoralism is just the system by which we legislatively barricade ourselves from the worst possible outcome for another couple of years. And then there are other systems that we have to use to advance real power. Though I think we're kind of out of time on that. I think right now it's probably just a holding pattern until the country collapses due to climate change.
Well, I understand that, and I think that that's really where the disagreement here lies. I guess if I just wanted to throw some final words in there, I get what you're saying, and I think that to a large extent you're correct, and to an extent I agree, which is why I keep stressing how meaningless, in my opinion, electoralism often is, which is why I think you can vote for a Green Party candidate in 42 out of the 50 states without having to even fear spoiling the election due to the fact that we live in an electoral college. The popular vote is not what elects the president. And therefore, I do think that we can seize upon the electoralism and the media circus that comes along with it to advance our agenda, right? In the same way that Bernie was. And like I said, Vosh, if Cornel West had decided to run as a Democrat, then I would be supporting him, just like I'm supporting Marianne Williamson. But we have to, at some point, move the ball forward. And that's not going to happen if we continue to elect milquetoast neoliberals like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. And if we keep letting the DNC cheat progressives out of the nomination like they did to Bernie Sanders, would you agree with that characterization, by the way, that Bernie Sanders was cheated out of the nomination?
Back in 2016 or 2020?
2016 specifically.
I think they skewed things heavily against him. I mean, I think that I think that it's possible that even without the skew, he still would have lost in the primary to Hillary, but I think he probably wouldn't have. They heavily weighed that scale. For sure.
And even in 2020, which I think there was a little bit less explicit rigging going on. Even then, if you remember in the very final debate, they were basically saying that they were going to toss the nomination to someone else at the convention because Bernie would only have a plurality and not a majority of the delegates. Everyone on the debate stage, including Elizabeth Warren, raised her hand saying, "Yep, if it's only a plurality of delegates, we're basically going to give it to someone else at the convention." And due to that reality, I just think it's a lot harder to tell progressives that, well, you just have to suck it up and hope that, you get a Bernie Sanders 2.0 that doesn't get fucked over by the DNC.
No, that's a mistake. Don't hope anything. Don't give them that hope. Don't say, oh, it might get better. It won't. The corporate duopoly is the corporate duopoly. You get nothing. Turn out, vote, prevent the fascists from winning. If you have any big designs for improving society, you'll have to act like an anarchist and do it outside of electoral systems. Non-electoral activism has been the headmark of leftist engagement for over a century. The idea that all this has to be folded in, I feel like a lot of people got the wrong message from Bernie. Bernie wasn't a sign that we have a chance to overturn the corporate duopoly with a good candidate. Bernie was a flash in the pan moment. Maybe we get more in the future, sure, and it's great. We should try for those and push for those. Run Democratic primary candidates. Hell, run Republican primary candidates. Why not? Run a progressive as a Republican in the primaries. Have fun. Make them argue. Get some clips for YouTube. But that's all. And the rest of the stuff you have to do, unfortunately, is hard work in the sense that it's ambiguous. It can't be empirically ground out the way that electoral numbers can. But that's where we have to be focused. The electoral stuff, that's just to keep the fascists at bay, because we saw what happened, right? Trump won one election. We get 3 Supreme Court justices who are now tearing away everything. We can't let it happen again.
You don't think that Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016 represented a new model for leftist engagement and activism in that broad, like a presidential campaign, a nationwide presidential campaign can provide the infrastructure to make those activist movements more viable? I don't think Bernie was just a flash in the pan. I think he was kind of showing us the way forward and showing us how we can use electoralism to spark the sort of nationwide political movement that we're going to need behind us in order to actually, try to keep the climate catastrophe at bay, in order to try to cut the Pentagon budget, in order to try to change our policy as it relates to Palestine. I mean, all of these issues that Bernie was able to elevate, obviously Medicare for all and free college being the main ones, we had a whole generation of people wake up to those issues and believe in those issues and believe that we can fight for those issues in a country where the Overton window had previously precluded those discussions from even happening in the first place.
But you know what would have happened if he had won? Not that much.
I disagree with that.
No, there's not that much. He would have been stonewalled at every level. The corporate duopoly might have abided his victory, but certainly not his success. He would have been maybe a better Carter. I mean, I think he would have been a better Carter, but there's a lot he said he wanted to do that he wouldn't have been able to get done. So, but hey, Bernie's going to be dead soon. But all the tens of millions of people that he got invested won't. They're still around. That groundwork is the real thing that we have to focus on.
But didn't you just make my point, which is that who cares if Bernie Sanders won or lost? The point is that he was able to start that movement by running in the first place, and he was able to bring these issues to the table by running in the first place, regardless of if he ever had a chance of even winning. Yeah. Right. So in the same way, whether or not Cornel West is able to get to 5%.
No, that's not. No. That gives ground to the Republicans. They have to run as Democrats. The Democrats always have to win. Bernie understood that. That's why he endorsed Hillary and Biden after losing both times. People got really mad at him over that. They thought that he was cucked for doing that. But he understands the most important thing is that a Democrat wins. A progressive Democrat is preferable, but you can never take away from the real victory, which is one against fascism.
Right. But assuming you don't buy into the spoiler effect, which, as I outlined, I do not for the reasons that I outlined, what is the problem with using a presidential campaign season and election in order to bring issues that we can't let die, the momentum behind them? We can't let this momentum behind these issues die. These are crises that are affecting tens of thousands of people. I mean, like I said, tens of thousands of people are dying without health insurance. How do we make sure that Biden is held accountable in some way for
You
these
don't.
crimes. If okay, well, I just don't accept that.
It doesn't matter whether you accept it. You think he's going to be held accountable before he dies? The man's old. He's going to die powerful.
Not held accountable in like a criminal sense, but like in the sense that someone's part of the conversation calling that out and making the case for the position that is universal health care.
Do it
Like,
in a Dem primary. Has it occurred to you that if a Green Party opponent started meaningfully challenging the Democratic establishment, they would pivot to being more conservative to distinguish themselves from their opposition? Like, think about it. Hillary Clinton shifted leftwards to appeal to people who are sympathetic to Bernie's message, but historically, when Democrats do poorly against Republicans, they have a tendency to shift rightward to try to capture votes they consider to be in the center. What if running Cornel West not only strips votes from Joe Biden, but gives him the impression that he's gone too far left if he has to fight for voters with somebody like him?
No, I don't think so, because
they've done it before.
The Democratic Party is already they want to shift as right as possible anyway, without our presence in the electoral equation, without any sort of a progressive. How?
On basically every level, the Democratic Party has moved left in the past decade, since 2016.
Okay, but I still don't think that with like. Where did you want to jump in?
Oh, I was just going to add, that might be, with that being said, the Democratic Party, if you look at the actual party principles or whatever the fuck it is that they list as their priorities every year, that might be true, that you can document that it has gone dramatically to the left. But Joe Biden himself has actually opposed a lot of those, even innocuous, moves to the left that the Democratic Party has conceded on, right? Like, he has not taken marijuana off the Schedule 1 drug classification, which a lot of people undermine, but it would be a step in the right direction for the ending of the drug war, right? And it would be something that he could do with a pen stroke. He did not. The Democratic Party says they believe in a $15 minimum wage. The Democratic Party says that they believe that we should have infrastructure that works in this country, and instead, because Joe Biden let himself be played so goddamn badly on purpose by the Republican Party, that they separated the United States, whatever the Build Back Better, and whatever.
So they moved left. The parties moved left, and Joe Biden is more progressive on a lot of issues than Obama. He's not progressive enough by the measure of the party, and what that means is that outside the actual electoral process, there's been a shift in what the American people want. And that's the work that really needs to get done. The Democrats aren't good about winning, but there is a relationship between the interests of the electorate and the behavior of the party and the people they run and the people that get voted for.
Vosh, do you concede that you have Stockholm syndrome?
No, not even remotely. I think that the argument
you don't think that the Democratic Party is holding you hostage?
No, because you think that so this is the critical difference in thinking here. You think that I have a limited perspective on this because I have accepted the nature of the duopoly.
I don't think you have a limited perspective. I would wager you're smarter than I am, Vosh.
Well, that's not a competition. But you think that my perspective in this is in some way tainted by my preconceptions here. I disagree strongly. I think that as a socialist should, I am aware of what electoralism can and can't get us. See, the trap of electoralism, this is what led to the death of all of the European social democratic parties. The idea that electoralism on its own is a viable mechanism for these giant lurches in social priority, the death of the corporate duopoly. This is huge stuff we're talking about. But as is the case with capitalism, which makes commodities of all which criticizes it, so too do all challenges to the corporate duopoly eventually get folded into it. The populists folded into it. The third-party candidates pushed out of it. Everything that can make a change doesn't, unless they're talking about something other than the duopoly. This is the nature of institution, right? Institutions seek first to protect themselves. You're not going to uplift this with anything other than revolutionary violence, man. And if you want to talk that, that's fine. I don't think that's immoral. But insofar as we're talking about voting and electoral results, I just want to focus on stuff I think that actually can be changed. I don't think the duopoly is going to be ousted in any meaningful sense by voting for Cornel West. I think that there's a real risk of Joe losing with people voting for Cornel West over him. And if you want to make challenges within the electoral bubble, then do it as a Democrat and endorse Joe after you inevitably lose. That's what Bernie did, and Bernie's great.
Sure. Yeah. Once again, I think that what it comes down to is that I view the electoral, the presidential election is a great time to do activism as it relates to all of these issues. I view presidential campaigns as a good vessel to get those issues out there. And ultimately, I think that the duopoly has to be protested because it will keep enabling fascism. A lack of democracy is always what's going to lead to fascism. And when we continually have to choose between two fake choices, one that's pre-selected by a corporate neoliberal party and one that's just a literal fascist, that's always going to yield a fascist, like 50% of the time. And if you have do you have a better way or idea to protest against the duopoly or protest to get ranked choice voting that doesn't involve actually participating in third party electoralism? Because again, I don't understand how we're going to even get a call out there for election reform as it relates to first past the post and ranked choice voting without some presence of third party candidates.
If you
without
want to sell to the American people the importance of third parties, you're going to have to do it in an environment where the Democrats aren't our literal only hope against fascists controlling the country. You're doing this in the worst possible environment. The only time voters are going to really care about third parties and about ranked choice voting is in an environment where they feel like they want to have choices across a wider band. But right now, in an institution where there are only two choices, two meaningful ones at least, the Democrats represent the pushback of fascism, or at least the delay of fascism. In this environment, people don't care. People don't want to talk about it. So let the Republicans lose. Let them lose ground. And when they're less relevant than they are now, maybe we'll see more change. That's what happened in 2016. Obama carried the country for 8 years, mostly calm, and the Republicans
Wait, what
hadn't
are you
gone as
talking
far
about?
right as they
Obama
are
carried the
now.
country for 8 years, then we got Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point precisely. They didn't know. We got Bernie Sanders back in 2016 because Democrats didn't feel as though they were warring off against an existential threat. They felt they had room to choose, to hope for more. But Donald Trump won because, well, Hillary Clinton was a shit candidate.
Because they cheated the progressive. See, this is where I think it becomes
wait,
a
stop.
go-round,
Don't
right?
fold everything into the same narrative. It doesn't matter why Donald Trump won. What I'm talking about is what gets people on the left to vote for more, to vote better, you know? They voted more, they voted better because they had 8 years of comfort that made them think, what if we could get more than Obama? What if we could get more than milquetoast neoliberalism? And Bernie Sanders was that hope. But now, people don't have room to care about that anymore because the party line is so huge and the threat of loss is so great. That's why more and more people are voting for who they think is the most electorally viable. That's why Joe Biden won more in 2020 than he did in 2016, even though the average American sided more with Bernie Sanders' points in 2020 than they did in 2016. The perspective shifted to Bernie, but the votes didn't because people are scared.
I would argue that though is because of the mainstream media, specifically MSNBC, basically just working as a propaganda arm of the Democratic Party, turning voters against Bernie Sanders and doing propaganda
They did that in
nonstop for
2016.
Joe Biden. Right. And I'm just saying they had 4 more years to do it and to brainwash people against Bernie.
No. People agree more with Bernie up to 2020. Like
that's what I'm
the
saying.
average
They
American
agreed more with him, and because of the media, they were brainwashed against voting for him because they were so scared of Trump.
You're missing it. People were scared. They were scared. That's why they said they voted for Joe Biden.
I'm saying they were scared because the mainstream media made them scared and told them that if they wanted to defeat if they wanted to defeat Donald Trump, who they were afraid of, then they had to vote for Joe Biden because Joe Biden was more electable than Bernie Sanders, which wasn't even true. Bernie Sanders would have beat Donald Trump the first time around. He would have beat him in 2020 as well. We wouldn't have had Donald Trump in the first place if the mainstream media hadn't fear-mongered about Bernie Sanders and done the Bernie blackout, refused to cover him in the first place.
Why do you think people were more susceptible to fear-mongering about Donald Trump in 2020 after having experienced his presidency for 4 years?
Well, I also think that COVID-19 and how he absolutely completely f***ed that up by every conceivable metric had a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Trump was a shock to the Democrat. Trump was a reminder that Republicans don't just represent neoconservatism. They represent something far worse. And now that that threat is laid bare, they can't do this faffing about this, oh, well, what if we had something nicer? What if the world could be better? No, they just need to win. So they're very susceptible to arguments of electability, you know? So we need to pull them out of that. Make sure the Republicans aren't so much of a threat that electability is the first and foremost concern for Democrats in a primary season. If Republicans are largely irrelevant, that it's mostly a fight between Democrats in a primary, then electability isn't the main concern people will have when voting for candidates. They'll be more concerned with who they actually like. And in that environment...
One sec.
Gavin's mic f***ed up because this is a broke boy podcast. Vosh will be right back with you in 1 second to continue making his
Good.
point.
Of course.
I think I'm good.
Proletarian.
So yeah, like I said, Bernie Sanders had a higher approval rating than Joe Biden. His positions were more in line with that of the American electorate, not just Democrats, but across the table politically, the positions that he was running on, a majority of Americans support. He was by far the more electable candidate over Biden. And if we didn't have basically half of American media acting as a propaganda arm of the Democratic Party, then people would have been educated as to that fact. And if the Democratic Party actually cared about democracy and winning and beating the fascists that we all care so much about defeating, then Bernie Sanders most likely would have been the nominee. We never would have had we never would have had Donald Trump in the first place, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
You do realize that if that's the argument you're going to go for, then voting third party is the worst thing you could do for third parties, right? Imagine a news day that'll play in MSNBC studios, you know? We face an existential threat from Donald Trump, and these leftist voters are throwing their votes away on a third-party candidate who's mathematically incapable of winning. We need third parties now less than ever. Look at what third parties did. Now here's a second Trump term, and here he is doing fascism, and oh, look at that. Look at all these people who voted for Cornel West. Wouldn't it have been nice if they had voted for Joe Biden? You're setting yourself up to be the fall guy for the worst presidency America's ever seen since, I don't know, Andrew Jackson. It could be so much worse. If you really think that if it's all like, well, the media says this, the media says that, then you're f***ed anyway. You're not outdoing the media. I think you're outdoing CNN.
That leads me to
MSNBC.
that leads me to another point we had, Vosh, which is that we have to build our own independent media ecosystem outside of the mainstream media. No, listen to me, Vosh. That's another thing that I think that the Bernie Sanders campaign represented, that's underrated, that's not talked about enough, but that as someone who works in the sphere of progressive online media has seen the effects of more so than probably anyone watching. Obviously, you understand this as well, being in the same space. But one of the most depressing things to me about the end of the Bernie Sanders campaign was watching not only the dissipation of the momentum behind the policies he supported, but also kind of the dissipation of the energy in the online space, the online media space that popped up as a result of his candidacy, the flourishing online ecosystem of independent left-wing content creators and newscasters that basically, like I said, only exists as a result of Bernie's campaign. In the absence of Bernie, a lot of that enthusiasm has dried up. And that's another reason why I think it's important to have some aggressive progressive voice on the national electoral stage, someone like Cornel West making the case for these policies, so that maybe we can see some more interest and enthusiasm, at least in the online space, around politics and around our progressive vision.
You want a media structure to pull more votes away from Joe Biden, and you think this will endear people?
I want an independent media structure so that we have at least some way to push back on the mainstream media, which is completely captured and controlled by the duopoly and by corporate America in general. We need independent media.
My experience,
you don't think we need independent media?
My experience with independent leftist media is that on average they're wrong more often than CNN or MSNBC. So I don't know how much stock I would put in independent media as an advocate. I mean, people in America have more left-leaning positions than we did in 2016, and there are more left-leaning candidates in both local and federal offices. So I think that there is still work being done to advance these on a local level, certainly. I just don't think...
I think that's crazy, Vosh, because like we both do this for a living. You don't think that what you do is valuable? You don't think that like having an ability to reach people that otherwise would just have to read mainstream media is valuable and preach the progressive priorities that we care about and try to make people's lives better? Like what we're doing is a response and a necessary pushback to the monopoly that the mainstream media has on discourse and Americans' understanding of our political landscape and conversation. I think that an independent progressive movement absolutely buoys the ability for there to be an independent progressive online space. And yeah, obviously there are crazy people online doing independent content.
Crazy people.
I to an extent, sure, but I would still much rather people be watching like Vosh, Kyle Kalinske, and David Pakman, or I don't fucking know.
Those are the ones I like. But say two people that have been praised recently by Cornel West are Glenn Greenwald and Russell Brand, two fascists. So, like, I don't know. First of all, I don't think he's a good advocate or a judge of, you know, who a positive representative for independent online leftist media is. And for two, like, you know, I agree we should have media power for sure. That's a non-electoral way of getting our message across, and I think there is value in that. But I just don't like this, like, okay, well, the corporate duopoly controls literally everything, and our only way of defeating it is creating somehow this like grassroots institution that is more powerful than it. But like separately, but then we fold it in, right? Like, you'll never match the money or media coverage of the GOP or the DNC. The most success that people on the online left have been in influencing Democrat politics, in promoting progressive candidates, Justice Dems, that kind of stuff, in advocating for policies that are on the left edge of what Democrats can get done. Obviously, if it was just up to any element of left-wing political engagement, then you'd say that, like, well, the communists have done this and that, but there's no communist representation in U.S. government, of course. We have to work within what can be done. We have to meet the voters where they are.
Well, you mentioned the Cornel West talking to Glenn Greenwald and Russell Brand, and I think that's actually interesting because it kind of is evidence contrary to your notion that he's only going after Biden voters. The fact that Cornel West is speaking to the audience of Glenn Greenwald and to the people that watch the Russell Brand show, I think proves the fact that he's trying to build a coalition of disaffected, independent, Democrat and Republican voters, people that might otherwise have voted for Trump. So if he's going on Russell Brand's show and Glenn Greenwald's show, making the case to a majority right-wing audience for leftist policies like Medicare for all, and maybe convincing some of them to vote for him instead of Donald Trump, then I think that's objectively a great thing.
Oh, that's a bad thing. Because when he goes on those shows, and I know because I watch them, he does his spiel, corporate politics bad, both parties bad. You know who thinks corporate politics are bad? Nazis. They think the Jews run them.
Come on. You can't say that Cornel West is a Nazi.
I mean it fully. I think Glenn Greenwald and Russell Brand especially have plenty of Nazis who watch them for sure, or at least people just as conspiracy-minded with biases towards anti-Semitism. Yeah. And I think that when you go on essentially a far-right platform and you go, oh, well, both sides are bad, I think that that's incredibly irresponsible. No, that's what he does.
No, Vosh, what he does is say irresponsible. If there are, and I'm not necessarily denying it, but if there are Nazis watching Russell Brand and they hear Cornel West and they hear Cornel West say, hey, I also hate the banks, for example, or the corporations, right? And the Nazi hates the corporations because they think Jewish people control them. But here's a really intelligent leftist academic explaining why the actual reason why you should hate the banks is because of capitalism and corporate exploitation.
Nazis hate capitalism and corporate exploitation. They hate the guys.
So you don't think it's important to explain to people legitimate reasons to be angry at the system and push back on.
They have legitimate reasons. The Nazis
no, they
don't. They think they do. There's
not any legitimate reason to be a Nazi. There's no legitimate need to be a Nazi. What fascists do is they exploit legitimate grievances that people have with a society that's unequal or unfair, and then they scapegoat it onto Jews or Mexicans or whoever the marginalized community in question is. But I think it's actually very valuable for someone who's good at communicating and someone who's
they already have the narrative. Trust me, I've argued with a lot of Nazis. You have to be careful with how you engage with this, because if you go up to them and you're like, I'm here to engage in good faith, now let me know I have concerns with the corporate duopoly and this and that, and explaining the problems with capitalism, this doesn't work. See, the problem is when you're talking to a fascist or a Nazi, the only acceptable ideological position is one of complete opposition to everything they are and everything they say. If they say they agree with you on something, no, they don't. They're lying. You don't trust them. After all, if they agreed with you on something, they wouldn't watch Glenn Greenwald, a fascist. This is the tweet that Cornel West put out for that. I was blessed to be in dialogue with my brother Glenn Greenwald. We discussed a variety of important issues from Ukraine to the hypocrisy of both the Democratic and Republican parties. What hypocrisy? Well, I know because I watched it. The hypocrisy associated with corporate politics and a rejection of populist ideology in spite of people's interest in it. You'll never guess which far-right group thinks the Republican Party has rejected populist influence and is instead up and cozy with capitalist oligarchs. See, that's the thing.
Yeah, but
you got to be careful.
I think that just because Cornel West engages in conversation with Glenn, we've engaged with conversations with Glenn.
I have too. He's called me a pedophile. I've called him a child grower. Yeah, I've had good dialogue.
So
with Glenn.
You know what I'm saying? And that doesn't make any of us fascists, right? That and look, I massively disagreed with Glenn with a lot of the support he seemingly showed for Bolsonaro at different times.
Yeah, that was interesting.
We've had massive disagreements for over a number of things, but I don't think that Cornel West went on there and agreed with him over any of the things that I would take major issue with. I think that what he did was he went out there and he said, basically his campaign platform, right? And I think that
as a candidate, you should want to get your platform out to as many people as possible. And I know that you're, more competent than the average person at debating Nazis, right? But I think that Cornel West also has a lifelong of being a Black liberation theologist. He has been a civil rights leader his entire life. This is a guy who has faced the actual onslaught of standing up for his beliefs. He was denied tenure over his solidarity with Palestinians. I mean, this is a guy that's stuck his neck out there time and time again. I think to just lump him in because you disagree with the host of a show that he was on with some of the most vile people that walk the earth is a little bit egregious, don't you?
Well, that's why I called him a crank and not a fascist. I don't think Cornel West is a fascist. I think that people on the left are really bad at dealing with fascists, though. In fact, the more time passes, the more I begin to think that liberals are the true bulwark against fascism. Because every time I go online, no, I know it's sickening. Every time I go online and I see engagement with anti-fascist dialogue, I see leftists downplaying.
Well, here's what I will agree with,
downplaying the Republicans.
Jump in really quickly because this is an absolute problem, and this is actually funny enough. We're going to find some harmonious agreement here. I think that there is a massive, massive amount of people on the left that we've experienced and dealt with that have been manipulated into believing that they are still leftists whilst supporting like literally nothing that an authentic leftist would support. Right?
And that's why I actually like you two. I actually mean that. I mean, we disagree on a ton, sure, but
sure.
On some, but no, I like that because like the Jimmy Dore types or whatever, where there's this like I'm sure a lot of people who watch Jimmy Dore think they're left leaning, but like holy shit, right? That term that belief has a lot of leeway. I guess in my experiences, typically I notice that if you're on the left and you're talking with a fascist in like with some camaraderie trying to find solutions, it's really easy to agree on problems and really hard to agree on solutions. Because if you talk about like, I did this with Charlie Kirk. I was talking with Charlie Kirk on Tim's Pool show. I mean, Tim Pool, you can do this with him as well, where Tim Pool loves to play this bullshit, right? The corporate oligarchy is terrible. Politicians buy our or corporations buy our politicians. All this phony, like populist, shit. And then you talk with them. Like, well, okay, so what are your solutions, right? So you think that corporations control this country. Great. Higher taxes, maybe higher like capital gains tax, corporate taxes, personal taxes. That's one. What if we nationalize big pharma, huh? They all clam up. They dry up like in an instant. Sure. Because in reality, right, when you see anti-big pharma Republicans, they're not anti-big pharma. They're not anti-corporate profits or oligarchy. They're anti-vaccine, right? So then you ask, okay, so what do you want to do with that? And it just turns out they only care about the vaccine. This is the issue I have. It's solutions over problems. Cornel West, I don't think he's a fascist. I think he's got a lot of great political positions. But man, I mean, Russell Brand just had DeSantis on as like a run piece for his campaign.
We're not defending Russell.
Also, Vosh, when Bernie Sanders was running for president, something that myself and a lot of other people in progressive media gave him a lot of credit for was going on Fox News and speaking directly to the legions of right-wing voters who were watching Fox News and making his case to those voters.
What did he say? The Democrats and the Republicans are both terrible.
No, but he made a lot of cases against corporations and Wall Street and a lot of the other things that you would chalk up to just being Nazi dog whistles when the right wing has an issue with.
But he never shit on the Democrats. He never
did it. He's an independent. He's not even a Democrat.
When he was running.
Right, but he was still an independent. He was making the case against the corporate Democratic Party constantly, especially in 2016.
But when he was running as a Democrat, and I saw these interviews, when he talked on Fox News, the way he expressed himself was that he would talk mostly about solutions, what the American people want and needed. He ran as a Democrat, and he didn't do this like the corporate duopoly, the hypocrisy of the Democrat Party, because as a Democrat, he's running for the Dems against the Republicans. Why do this back and forth thing? Why do this equivocation if you're trying to support one side over the other? Well, in truth, there's no reason to, and Cornel West is running as an independent, so he wouldn't have to, but that's what I take issue with. It can't come at the cost of Democrat viability. Bernie knew that, and he was careful with his language. He would criticize institutions, for sure, but it was always very structured. It was very purposeful. He never gave anything away or ceded to the enemy.
Right. And I actually think that was one of his biggest missteps. I think that he should have ran against the Democratic Party way harder. In the same way, Vosh, that Donald Trump ran unapologetically against the Republican Party. He said, I'm not going to endorse the nominee if it's not me. And they're rigging it against me. Of course, they weren't rigging it against him. They were rigging it against Bernie. Bernie actually had a legitimate claim to having it rigged against him. And he basically just went, he went along. And I think he should have absolutely made the Democratic Party one of the bigger villains of his campaign. I think he should have tried to get more non-Democrat voters as part of his coalition, because clearly the ones that he were after were too drunk on MSNBC propaganda to think outside of the box.
If you really believe that center and right-leaning voters would have been easier gets for Bernie Sanders than MSNBC liberals.
Joe Rogan said he was going to vote for Bernie Sanders.
Joe Rogan is an idiot. Joe Rogan has 85 IQ.
Exactly.
No, he'll say anything. He'll say Joe Rogan is an anti-vaxxer who gives credence to far-right conspiracy theories, who said he'd vote for Bernie because Bernie was the one who showed up to talk to him. Okay.
No, Vosh. He said he was going to vote for Bernie, and a lot of people in his audience would have done the exact same thing, because they just had the knee-jerk reaction that he was the most anti-establishment candidate, which is actually what a lot of people do vote on. That's why Trump was so successful. And Bernie absolutely would have got a bunch of Trump voters and a bunch of libertarian voters and independent voters, because they actually felt like he was anti-establishment, because they actually felt like he was being honest with his critiques.
He did well in the Joe Rogan interview, but he didn't shit on the Democratic Party the way that you wanted him to. So he did well in spite of doing that. I think he was able to come across as authentic and engaged without having to lose ground in that fashion.
But here's where I think that the maybe there's a little bit more of an explicit line that you would agree with. The fact that he continuously talked about how Joe Biden was oh, my good friend Joe. He refused to call out Joe Biden explicitly on the debate stage for his comments on wanting to cut Social Security, right? Like, he was just like, oh, people can Google it, right? He should have hammered him directly for that, because I think he was too scared of
the Republicans winning.
Yeah, I honestly think he was too afraid of being blamed for it, right? He didn't want them to turn around and say, "Oh, you weakened Joe Biden so much and then still lost, and now Donald Trump is president." But I also think a byproduct of that was that he didn't follow through on his swing. You know what I mean? I think that Bernie Sanders definitely made contact with the ball, but he didn't follow through on his swing, and so it kind of chipped away his opportunity.
But that was smart.
I think that you could call it smart in the sense that he was playing it safe. He was playing it safe, but he didn't give it the final push that he would have needed to himself become the nominee, because he was unwilling to slay the dragon.
Imagine if he had been ruthless against Joe Biden, had lost the primary, had said he's not going to endorse Biden, had criticized him relentlessly, and then Donald Trump went on to win in 2020. You realize that would have set back leftist politics for half a century, right? Like Bernie Sanders would have been the effigy that MSNBC liberals burn in their fireplaces every year. It would have been over for us. I know it sucks that we have to cuck ourselves out in electoral politics and play nice and play the game and everything, but those are the rules. They're skewed against us, but those are the rules. We can't not follow the rules because they exist for a reason. Namely, that if we don't follow them, things turn out worse for us than if we do. That's why I stress doing work in other venues, because we are very much on the back foot here. We do have a chance to do something meaningful within the electoral system, even if Joe Biden is running uncontested in the primaries, and that is not go fascist. And I consider that an incredibly worthwhile goal. I mean, far more so than... As I said, the difference between Bernie and Biden is infinitesimally small compared to the difference between Biden and Trump. I think that is something worth engaging in, being proud of. And we'll look for opportunities to change things for the better. More progressives than ever are in Congress, and more Democrats than ever like progressive policy positions. We clearly are doing something.
Right. Well, I also just wanted to push back a tiny bit and maybe defend Dr. West a bit, because Dr. West actually did vote for, or he endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020. Zach and I actually saw Dr. West speak at a Bernie Sanders rally right before the Iowa caucus in 2020. And he then endorsed Joe Biden after Bernie Sanders lost the nomination. So Dr. West is someone that I think understands the fact that the Democrats do represent a lesser of two evils. That's why he voted for Joe Biden and encouraged people to do so. So I don't think it's really fair to treat him like he just is this crank who doesn't understand the difference. I think he does understand the difference. And I think he saw what the Democrats did to Bernie Sanders, a campaign that he was part of. And, like I said, was basically being a surrogate for at the time. I think he saw that and came to the conclusion that, well, the Democratic Party is not a viable way for progressives to make progress because of what
But
they
Bernie
did.
did. He
Right,
shifted the
but he didn't get
discourse
the
massively to
nomination,
the left.
and yeah, and I think Cornel West can potentially, hopefully, do the same thing because
No.
maybe if this was 2016, he would have run as a Democrat, but he saw what they're doing to Marianne Williamson. He sees the fact that they're not letting there be debates. He sees the fact that they're not sanctioning any sort of an actual primary. So I think his thinking is, well, if that's the case, then this is the only way to get my talking points into the mainstream. This is the only way to get these priorities on the table at all.
Have more luck doing it running as a Democrat. As the third, first of all, he's not going to get 5%. But even if he did, he would get a smattering of a few million from the federal financing. And then what? He's not on the debate stage that people are going to be watching. Like, think about it. The Libertarian Party has more money put into it than he would get with federal funding because the Libertarian Party is associated with a lot of wealthy think tanks. How many people watch the 2020 Libertarian Party primaries and subsequent, address in the general? It's not like corporate media is under any obligation to host an official debate three-way between him, Trump, and Cornel and Joe Biden, right? Like, he's just going to be on his own stage alone with one person.
I mean,
with a GoPro.
Ross Perot got on the debate stage as an independent candidate in the 90s.
This isn't a Ross Perot situation.
I'm just saying it is possible for a third party or independent candidate to get on the debate stage.
If the corporate media wants them to, sure, but the Libertarian Party candidate hasn't before, even though they've received more money than the Green Party stands to gain, just because the Libertarian Party has a lot of wealthy people who donate to it, the Mises Caucus, whatever. So I just it seems like the outcome here is that the best case scenario is we're sacrificing potential electoral viability for Biden over Trump in order to get a fraction of the public discourse power that the Libertarian candidates get.
I feel you, man. I just think that the duopoly is one of the aspects of our country that needs to be fixed the most. I think that it directly enables and leads to fascism over and over again, predictably, like clockwork. And I think that at some point we have to stand up and demand more options. And if that means fighting to get a third voice, a leftist voice on the debate stage, I think that's a noble endeavor, even if it's not viable in this particular election season. I agree. Cornel West probably not going to win this election, but I still think we have to start somewhere. I think we have to start somewhere, and Cornel West is a pretty good place to start.
You have to wait until
opinion.
We're not under such threat, even if that means the rest of your life. Maybe you die waiting. Maybe your
But you just said that every
grandchildren.
Republican candidate is just as bad, if not worse, than Trump. So even if Trump wasn't the nominee, then when is not what you said?
Maybe 4, 8 years. Well, right now, sure, but give it time. Maybe the Republican Party shifts outward. Maybe they lose a ton of ground because their Nazi shit starts to weigh negatively on the American people. The timescales that we're dealing with here mean that maybe we just are unsatisfied with our electoral reach for decades at a time. But I mean, so what? That doesn't mean we can't make progress. So no, I mean it. So what? That doesn't mean we can't do stuff. That doesn't mean we can't.
It means that 50% of the time a fascist is going to become president.
Wait, no. That's not. If we overwhelmingly support the Democrats over the Republicans, we can push back the Republican Party. It doesn't have to be a 50-50.
I see where you're coming from, but I just think that people like you, they often seemingly have so much more energy to direct against third-party voters than they have to direct towards efforts like ranked choice voting, which would eliminate the spoiler effect in the first place. I seriously, when I listen to people like you that hold this philosophy, I seriously think you spend more time advocating against third-party voters than you spend advocating for ranked choice voting, which would get rid of the whole spoiler effect in the first place and neutralize this entire problem.
I'm a supporter of ranked choice voting, but right now it's not really on the docket. I mean, my primary concern is making sure that Joe Biden wins. That's not really material to that outcome.
I feel like we can keep going back and forth, man, and I definitely understand where you're coming from. But I would say
he needs to win. He can't not win.
I would say that yes, Donald Trump needs to lose, but I would love to see more energy from people that feel like you do towards getting us to ranked choice voting than demonizing third-party voters.
It's immaterial to the modern. The shift to ranked choice voting, which would be a shift for our federal electoral system, would be this nationwide discourse that is going to. Do you think
that's really more unachievable than Medicare for all or any of the other progressive priorities that we fight for?
I don't talk about Medicare for all right now. What do you? Is there a Medicare for all bill in the House?
You don't think we should talk about human rights atrocities like the death of 60,000 people a year due to lack of health insurance just because it's not viable? We can't talk about it.
You should talk about it, and I do talk about the need for there to be ranked choice voting, but I'm not going to act as though right now there's some kind of wedge or platform in which that can actually happen. I want to gradually shift people's perspectives on these issues so that if there is an opportunity to act on it, they then have the will to do so.
So it's just incrementalism. How is that even progressive?
Yeah, it's an electoral system. Incrementalism is the only thing possible within the system. Are you suggesting revolutionary violence?
Well, no, we're not suggesting revolutionary
I've
violence.
got like a ton of guns in my back room, so if it's kicking off now, I mean,
that's the thing. It's like I agree with you actually abstractly, Vosh, that maybe one of the only things that will ever lead to the kind of change that you and I and Gavin would envision, you know, if we were to start a country from scratch, right, and you know, envision it as a socialist utopia, we would never get there without a revolution of power structure. Right. So in the same vein, Gavin and I are also interested in harm reduction. I think what it comes down to is that we're more willing to roll the dice. But
roll the dice on fascism, man.
I hear where you're coming back on it, which is why we've made the caveats lots of times that, you know, if you are in a swing state like Pennsylvania, you're going to have, you know, a decision on your hands to make. I'm pretty entrenched in the idea. Like I voted for Hillary Clinton and I voted for Joe Biden, and I feel like I got played twice. But Vosh, what would your final thoughts be, or whatever, you know, for maybe not for me and Gavin, but for the people listening, you want to sway?
I just think from a historical perspective, if one were to look at this in retrospect, the idea of we had two choices, one of them a continuation of neoliberal policies with incremental improvements at times, and the other being fascism in the end of our democracy. And I rolled the dice on a slight chance of possibly getting a slightly louder voice to the potential of a third-party candidate advocating for a system in which they would have a future chance of winning. It's such an esoteric and long shot take to weigh against something so important and meaningful right now. And the last thing I want to say is I don't want anyone to get the impression that anything that I'm saying is doomer, you know? As far as I'm concerned, I have like a melon baller, you know? And it balls melons. And somebody's coming up to me and they're like, okay, well, can you do heart surgery with it? I think we should do heart surgery. I'm like, balls melons. And they were like, you don't think that can be used to do heart surgery? What are you, doomer? What do you think we can't do? Well, that's not what it's for. Electoralism is for suffering and for keeping the worst candidates out. It's so we can suffer and hate life and this country, which is what a socialist should be doing all the time. If more radical action has to be taken, it won't be at the ballot box.
Yeah, well, to quote our friend Dafini, who was on our show yesterday, I think she said that basically what you just said about electoralism, right? There's not much you can get done with it in any way, at least as far as a presidential election is concerned. But what it does provide a great opportunity for is a mass education of the American people. That's what Bernie Sanders proved. And I think that someone like Cornel West, who is undeniably an incredibly gifted communicator, capable of speaking to and reaching swaths of this country that are not on the left, that are not progressives, see his conversations with Joe Rogan, see his conversations with Tucker Carlson as an example of his ability to reach those people and to communicate. I think that someone like that can at very least lift the boats of activism. They can bring more attention towards the issues that do matter, and frankly the human rights atrocities that both parties oversee, including the Democrats. And in my opinion, and this might be another slight area of disagreement seemingly between our analysis, but in my opinion, whether or not there's a bill for Medicare for all on the table or not, you don't stop talking about those tens of thousands of dead Americans that literally die every year, murdered by our government, state-sponsored violence due to a lack of health care. I don't think you stop talking about that. I don't think you stop talking about the atrocities being, committed in places like Palestine, which both parties oversee. I don't think you stop talking about the ecocide and the drilling permits that Joe Biden has just approved, more so even than Donald Trump did. And if we have an opportunity to talk about those things that a presidential election provides us, if we have an opportunity to bring those things up and to, try to hold Biden accountable in the smallest possible way we can, then I think it's worth it. And honestly, sorry.
Damn, Gavin got pulled off at the stump. He was.
Yeah, sorry guys, my Mac keeps unplugging. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I would say, man. I certainly see where you're coming at it from, and I think it's an interesting conversation. I truly do.
Oh, it is an interesting conversation. Just speaking of tens of thousands of dead Americans, just remember that there are tens of thousands of dead Germans who were killed in 1919 when the socialists of that country failed to understand their historical time and place and ground themselves to death against the SPD. We're very bad at knowing when it's our time and place to make change, and it's a dangerous gamble, because when we're wrong, we all die first. That's how the poem begins, right? First they came for the communists, then the trade unionists. Yeah. So, just saying, be careful.
Sure.
Thanks for coming on, Vosh. It was great chatting with you. I'm sure we'll do it again sometime. It was a pleasure.
I hope you both have a wonderful day. And it was. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, man. Take care.
Take
Yeah,
care.
thanks, Vosh. And thanks everyone that tuned in. It was a great conversation, really important conversation. And yeah, genuine, sincere thank you, Vosh, for engaging and having the discussion.
Of course. Y'all have a wonderful day. Got another debate to do.
Sweet.
Peace.
Good luck, man. We'll see you next time.
Well, we had a conversation, that's for sure. Oh, to be clear, just because I don't want anything that I say to get misconstrued, the corporate duopoly in America, the whole we have to choose between Republican and Democrat, is it's a very difficult thing to uproot, because the system that we live within is so like structurally geared towards those outcomes that it's almost like a feature of the landscape. It's like the Rockies. It's as much a part of America as the swamps in Florida and the desert in California. It's so grounded, and I think it needs to change. But it's so structurally rooted that change is not going to like swing over in an election. It's going to be a process, but it's a process that's going to take a lot of time and forethought and concentration. And that can only happen in an environment where we're not constantly being threatened by fascists. I think that people are most open to growth and change when they're not under threat. I think the best historical analogy you could sort of pull there is that it's usually empires that are not at risk that grow to greatness. Like if you want to look at the Islamic Golden Age or Rome or ancient Greece or Egypt, the times where you see this outpouring of economic, social, cultural, artistic development is usually after the fighting stops or calms down for a bit. Same with Japan, like Japan had all these different kingdoms and shogunates fighting or whatever, but when things were unified under a central shogunate, the population boomed because people stopped fighting and people started producing a lot more art, and things got overall a lot more complicated. It's threat makes people focus first and foremost on preventing the threat from reaching us, And maybe we'll never make it so the Republicans are totally irrelevant or whatever, but we can at the very least not have the opposite party be Nazis, right? Like that's the current. It's like it's like a coin flip right now between neoliberalism and like DeSantis every day is like, here are all these Nazis in my campaign, and it's like, man, we can do better than that. I think they can be made weaker. I saw a lot of people in our chat who thought that I were like fear-mongering about the fascist thing. I don't know what I need to do to get it across to leftists what the stakes are, like it's not just trans people, like they're the excuse. But do you still think the guests were egotistical and selfish? I mean, I disagree with them. I do like talking to the Vanguard boys, to be clear. I obviously disagree with them a lot, but in a sea of grifters and obviously insincere people, talking to two people who clearly believe what they say, even if I disagree with what they say, is refreshing and makes me feel like a human being rather than somebody shadowboxing with a crudely drawn caricature of an idea. I like that, at least. No, I don't think Cornel West is a Republican plant. I just think that the Republicans recognize the fact that his candidacy is a threat to votes that could go to Joe Biden, so they're promoting him heavily under the guise of populist, How do we get to a place where we no longer have to fear fascists? Win over a lot of people. Make really strong arguments about how Republicans are bad and their ideas are bad, the outcomes of their ideas are bad,